Welcome to Dr. Gerald Mann's signature series, You Can Begin Again. Dr. Mann is the host of the television program Real Life and the senior pastor of Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas. And now, part 2, You Can Begin Again, After Great Sorrow.
I decided to start the millennium with about a 12-part series on You Can Begin Again. That was 3 weeks ago. That was 3 weeks ago, and I never dreamed that I was on the edge of the greatest loss of my life. I don't know if I can get through this today. If I can't, Carlton, stand by. We'll sing a song and adjourn. I never heard people complain about being let out of church early. I thought long and hard about this. I'm going to read to you from 2 Samuel. I'm not going to look at anybody very long because you are going to break me up, okay? 2 Samuel 12, after David's great disgrace. The child born to David and Bathsheba became very ill. David secluded himself in his grief. He prayed constantly, refused to eat, lay on the floor for a week. When the child died, the servants were afraid to tell David for fear that he would do harm to himself. But David knew what had happened when he saw them whispering to each other. He arose, bathed, combed his hair, went to the house of God to worship. Then he returned to the palace and ate a large meal. The servants wondered why he had grieved while the child was alive instead of afterwards. Because, he said, while the child lived, I thought maybe God would spare him. Now that he is gone, there is no need to punish myself. I can go to where he is, but he cannot come back to me. I'm not going to talk about you can begin again after great sorrow. I'm going to talk about beginning to begin again after great sorrow. With Lois gone 3 weeks, our 42nd anniversary coming up Tuesday, I really wish I could tell you that I've received some great visitation from God, that he had come and made himself known to me. I wish I could tell you that I've had visions of Lois where she has come to me from the future, and I've heard of those, but the only thought I've had is that if heaven is paved with gold, Lois is up there bartering with St. Peter about how to put it all in a medallion to hang around her neck. I haven't had any visions. I wish I could tell you I had great victories over my suffering, but I don't have any of that. The only thing I have to tell you is that I'm hanging on to 4 things. And your grief may be the loss of a loved one. There are many kinds of grief. You could have lost your marriage. You could have lost your health. You could have lost that big business deal. You could have lost contact with somebody you love. There are all kinds of grief experiences. This is not psychotherapy for Gerald Mann today. This is one beggar sharing with other people who've had grief how I'm beginning to begin again. I'm hanging on to 4 things. 1, I'm hanging on to good memories. My first reaction to Lois's death was guilt, self-blame. I thought of all the days and times that I was gone and not present to her. I felt that I wasn't the husband I should have been and the helper I should have been when she was sick. And I flooded myself with a lot of guilt and blame. I had one little thought deep in my mind that I think was put there by God. I was really cursing myself. And a little voice said to me, you must have loved her very much, because nobody could be that guilty unless they cared deeply. And that gave me just a little ounce of medicine I needed to get through that day. I'm holding on to good memories. The mind plays tricks on you. You tend to flood your mind with all kinds of bad things, but I'm holding on to those good memories, and I have so many. We have so many good memories, and they're not the great swashbuckling things. They're the great events in our lives. They're the little things like having coffee together once a day and having our TAD, as we called it, T-A-D, our talk a day. Those things I'm holding on to. You can begin again after great sorrow, whatever your loss is. And everybody in this room, if you're not suffering now, you will have sorrow and loss. And when that happens, I encourage you to hang on to the good memories. Willie Nelson, my great friend of almost 30 years now, has a wonderful song that has been reverberating in my head through this whole bloody ordeal. Remember the good times. They are fewer in number and easier to recall. Don't spend too much time on the bad times. Their staggering number will be heavy as lead on your mind. You can begin again by hanging on to the good memories. The second thing I'm hanging on to is gracious people. Every time I've started complaining in these last 3 weeks about losing the love of my life and really started shouting at God, He doesn't answer at all. Some gracious person shows up. I have not been able to read all of the letters and cards from our own congregation. We started with 200, and every day that it's replaced by another stack. There have been thousands of people who have written more than once and have done so many gracious things. I am convinced that God does not show Himself in the world because He's waiting on us to do that. The grace of God has come to me through your graces. You know, I have always privately been a little angry at you. I've never told you this, but I've never felt like the beloved pastor. I've always thought I'm a leader and an entrepreneur, and I work hard on my sermons, and I dream dreams and fight dragons and all that. But I never have felt very loved, and of course that's my garbage, not yours. But no more. I have never in my life felt as safe and secure with who I am and where I am, and it's because of you. Somebody asked me the other day if you were going to give an analogy, which best fits River Bend? An organization? No. A cause? No. A hospital? Yeah, that's it. It's a place to come and be healed. So you can begin again, even in the depths of suffering, if you'll hang on to gracious people. I got to thinking when I was driving up here today, the worst nightmare for an atheist is extraordinary goodness, the goodness of people. You know, if we are only just more highly evolved animals, how do you explain extraordinary goodness? I was thinking of that man, you remember when the airplane went down in Washington, D.C., and the Potomac River when it was clogged with ice several years ago, and there were 3 people standing on an little iceberg, and there was a woman in the water, and the helicopter came and let down the collar to rescue her, and she couldn't lift her arm. She was too cold. And this man, who didn't know her, a complete stranger, jumped into the water, put the collar around her, they hoisted her to safety, and he drowned. How do you explain that? That's an atheist's worst nightmare. How do you explain extraordinary goodness? God has come to me through gracious people. And when your suffering comes or whatever your loss is, hang on, folks. Hang on to gracious people. The reason for this church is so that the grace of God can flow through us to other people who are hurting. The third thing I'm hanging on to in this time of sorrow is glad reunions. Lois's death has triggered so many reunions with people that I had clean forgot, as we say in Texas. People I haven't seen or heard from in years and years have rallied to say hello and I love you. There have been glad reunions with old friends. And I want to tell you there have been glad reunions with old foes as well. Harold O'Chester. Yes, I'll use his name. I've used it in vain enough. He's a pastor from up the road, and he and I have had a little rivalry, a big rivalry going. We've been trading blows for a long time. He jumped into the limousine and hugged me and wept. Well, old Harold's a friend now. Probably always was. I was just too little to recognize it. My sister and I have not spoken to each other in 4 years. Now, you would expect somebody who preaches what I preach for that not to be the case, but it has been. We've been estranged. She showed up unannounced, and we've reconciled. Glad reunions. When I went to a little town, 2,000 people, when I was in the 7th grade, they had a boy there named Danny who was being touted as the next great football star in our community. And I came and moved him out of his place into another place. He was a good athlete. And we never were bitter rivals. We were just respectful competitors. I got a letter from him just last week. I want to read it to you. He says, I always thought the best of Lois. She was always so glad to see everybody. She was fun to be around. I can remember her cackle, her laughter. We will all miss her. Jerry, at our last reunion, you made apologies for your behavior in high school. After thinking about it, we all said and did things we wish we could retract. We all have apologies to make, but you were the only one who did. To say that I was surprised when you entered the ministry would be an understatement. But you showed us all that you were for real. I, for one, am proud of your success and glad to have been your classmate and your teammate. I shall always remember Lois on the sidelines, cheering for you. I'm certain she still is and always will be. Glad reunions. You can begin again after suffering if you'll hang on to glad reunions and let your pain trigger reunions with people who can enrich your life. But the thing I'm hanging on to hardest in this time of grief is what I call God's future. Every time I've wanted to quit in these last 3 weeks, God imposes his future on me. We have a 13-year-old grandchild who lives at our house. I'm 62 years old, but I can't think about quitting because she's the future. My beautiful children who are here today, they're the future. I was thinking about the reason I chose the scripture that I read about David grieving before the child died and then not grieving afterward. The reason I read that is because David, for all of his problems and faults and sins, had everything in the right focus. Think of that last verse. I can go to where he is, but he can never come back to me. David understood that there was only one option for us, and that's forward. I wanted to give up and quit, but God keeps imposing his future. Forward is the only direction we have to go. It's just now beginning to sink in that all of the great plans that Lois and I made for our golden years, all of our future together, is gone. I do stupid things like call her name to ask her where something is. She had 5 toothbrushes for me at all times, and we can't find any of them. And all of the great plans we made are gone. Our future that we planned for this time frame is gone. The only future there is God's future. I have come to know in a way that I have never known before that Paul's message to us in 1 Corinthians 15 is so true. If it's not true, we are the greatest fools of all, he says. In the twinkling of an eye, when the trumpet shall sound, the dead shall rise, never to die again. And then he says, we will see him, Jesus Christ, as he is, and we shall be like him. I'm hanging on to God's future. You all have plans, make plans, execute plans, do the best you can, but never forget, when the darkness of grief comes over you, hang on to God's future. Forward is the only direction we have. My friend John Claypool lost his daughter Laura Lou at 13 with leukemia. 12 years later, he was speaking at a conference. A woman came to him and said, can I share something with you? He said, yes. She said, last night I had a dream that I was at Oxford University in the library, and there was a beautiful young woman there in her 20s, blonde-haired, sitting at a table. And I was looking at her, and she motioned for me to come and sit beside her. And I came and sat by her, and she said, I'm Dr. Claypool. I think you know my father. And I said, well, I don't know him. I've heard him speak a few times. She said, well, I and my colleagues are working on a cure for leukemia. And every time we think we have the riddle solved, it evaporates in our hands. We get so close, and then we don't solve it. She said, I've become convinced in recent days that it's because my father will not let me go. If you see my father, please tell him, let me go and live my life so that you can live yours. First time I heard that story, it sounded rather cruel, but folks, that's it. If you're in grief now, if you've lost, or when you do, hang on to 4 things in the beginning: good memories, gracious people, glad reunions, and God's future. We all have a future with Him. We were born out of the laughter of God, and we return to the laughter of God. And I believe C.S. Lewis was right. Our suffering on this timeline is God's megaphone for gaining our attention. Gee, I got through that.
This concludes Tape 1 of Dr. Gerald Mann's signature series, You Can Begin Again. Dr. Mann's books and audio cassettes are available from Gerald Mann Ministries by calling 1-800-974-HOPE. That's 1-800-974-4673. Or you can write to us at Post Office Box 160-100, Austin, Texas, 78716. You can now select Tape 2 in this series for the messages You Can Begin Again After Moral Failure, followed by You Can Begin Again After 40.